Hello everyone, it's me, your favorite satanic baking YouTuber. And yes, I am saying that very confidently. If somehow that sentence does not apply to me, please let me know how. So you guys might not know this, but for the past few months, I've been practicing my croissant skills pretty hard. My next week in the live video will show all of it, so don't worry. I'm happy to announce that they're turning out pretty good, but not perfect. I struggle with wanting things to be perfect, so today I wanted to lower that bar just a little bit while continuing to practice my croissant skills. And all of that to say that we're going to be making Danishes, real Danishes, made with Danish dough, aka croissant dough but easier. Originally, these were supposed to be tiramisu Danishes, but I forgot to add any sort of coffee elements, so tiramisu Danishes minus the coffee, chocolate Danishes with mascarpone cream? I don't know what I'm calling them, but for those of you who may not know, Danish dough is essentially the same as croissant dough, but with the addition of eggs. Just that tiny little addition plus some extra sugar makes the dough so much easier to work with, as well as the Danish pastry itself needing less layers and therefore less rolling and chilling, etc. So let's get started, shall we? I will be using Paul Hollywood's recipe, the one from his book, Bread, because the one on his website, which I believe was supposed to be pulled from the book, is very different for whatever reason. I'll try that one next time. So first things first, we're going to need 250 grams of butter for the butter block. I highly recommend you get European butter for this since it has a higher fat percentage. Next it's time to pound the butter. If you live in an apartment building, I don't really have any advice as to how to make this less noisy, but you can always bring some Danishes to your neighbors as a peace offering. It works for me every time. Now, as per Mr. Hollywood's instructions, I roll the butter into an 11 by 6 inch rectangle or a 30 by 15 centimeter, which should give you a thickness of roughly 8 millimeters. Real thin. And make sure you roll the butter into those corners, okay? We're going for precision here. Once you're done, pop the butter into the fridge and we're going to tackle the dough next. We're going to need 260 grams of warm milk and 10 grams of yeast. If you're using active dry yeast, make sure to let it bloom at this stage. If not, you can simply dissolve it into the milk and whisk in 1 egg. In the bowl of your stand mixer... Oh my god, I forgot I needed this by hand. Wow, nice. Well, you can make this in your stand mixer, obviously, but for those that don't have one, don't be discouraged, because if I can do it, you certainly can too. Seriously, I'm very weak. Mix 500 grams of bread flour, 80 grams of sugar, and 7 grams of salt together. Now, to incorporate the wet ingredients into the dry, you can either mix them in a bowl until you're ready to start kneading, or you can do the well method that is commonly used for pizza and pasta dough. However, don't do what I did, which is decide to go for one method and then immediately change your mind because you picked a bowl that was way too small and then make a huge mess, okay? Okay. Now, the great thing about doughs that need to be laminated is that they don't need to be kneaded that much. Need to be kneaded. You want the gluten to start to develop enough to gain some elasticity, but not anywhere near to the point that it passes the window pane test. So when it's looking like this, soft, cohesive, yet a little voluptuous, you're good to go. After you're done kneading, it's time to rub up the dough and put it in the fridge to cool down. This is where we start setting ourselves up for success during lamination by getting the dough into a rectangular-ish shape instead of balling it. You don't have to be precise at this point, but eventually we will want to roll this dough out into a 20 by 7 inch rectangle or a 50 by 20 centimeter. To cool down the dough a little bit faster, I put it in the freezer instead of the fridge, and I also took the butter out so that it's pliable for when it's time to start laminating. Also, I like to cool down my work surface because I'm not very fast when it comes to rolling, so that's a pro tip for you. Once your dough is feeling nice and stiff, it's time to get started. Roll it out and place the butter on the bottom half of the dough. Your butter needs to be cold, yet pliable and bendy. Not hard enough to break or soft enough to fall apart. Mine, as you can probably tell, was just a few degrees too warm. I use Kerrygold and it gets warm quick. Make sure everything fits nicely and then fold the top third of the dough down on top of the butter. Do a quick slice to release tension and then fold the bottom half up. So you get dough, butter, dough, right? Yeah, that sounds right. Now, I don't know if I messed up measuring or something, but this didn't quite fit right, but that's okay. Like I said earlier, Danish dough is a lot more forgiving, so we shall carry on. Do a 90-degree turn and carefully press down to lock in those layers, and then we're going to do our first 30-minute chill. Wrap the dough in plastic wrap, prop it onto a tray, and then into the fridge. After the 30 minutes, take it out of the fridge, and chances are that the butter is too cold at this point, and starting to roll might break it. So if you have to, leave it at room temperature for a few minutes. Mine was a little bit too cold, cold and it started to shatter here, as you can see, so I decided to let it sit on my bench for a few minutes. When making laminated doughs, I find that the most important skill to work on is decision making. Whatever recipe you're using can't possibly account for your specific circumstances, room temperature, fridge temperature, butterfat percentage, etc. So take your time and assess the situation in front of you. Once the butter has been locked into the dough, there's really only two things that you need to worry about: preventing the butter from breaking or absorbing into the dough, and letting the gluten rest if needed. The recipe might say do 3 folds with 2 30-minute breaks after each of them, but maybe your gluten is really tense and needs to rest a little bit longer, or maybe your butter is too hard and needs time to warm up. You know, these are things that you need to assess for yourself. So don't get discouraged just because what's in front of you doesn't look or feel exactly like the recipe tells you it should. You will end up with delicious pastries no matter what. I did a letter fold here, making sure to dust off as much flour as possible so that layers stick together, and then I put it back in the fridge for another 30 minutes. And then after that, I did the final letter fold like so, before putting it in the fridge overnight. Next, I wanted to try and make a chocolate flavored caramel. So for that, we will need 400 grams of white sugar and 120 grams of water in a saucepan. We're going to cook that over medium-high heat until it turns that beautiful deep amber color. Don't stir this mixture, but rather swirl it around every once in a while to make sure that it's all cooking evenly. And make sure to keep the sides of the pot clean by running a wet brush over it. This will prevent the sugar crystals attached to the walls of the pot from crystallizing your caramel, which would be very undesirable. Once you have attained that precious amber hue, take the pot off the heat and add in 170 grams of butter. This is going to bubble up quite a bit, so please be careful. Caramel burns are some of the worst burns you can get. After the butter is fully mixed in, pour in 240 grams of heavy cream. I recommend using a whisk for this. And finally, add in 170 grams of chocolate. I used semi-sweet, a pinch of salt, and 25 grams of Dutch processed cocoa powder. And that right there is your chocolate caramel done. And yes, it is as delicious as it sounds. I poured it into a pan, covered it in plastic wrap to prevent the skin from forming, and put it into the fridge to set until the next day. And just like that, it's magically the next day and time to do the final rollout of the dough. This was a little bit of a process. We're aiming for a 12-inch square or a 30 centimeters, and I had to pause to cool down the dough and let the gluten relax multiple times. However, we did get there eventually. I rolled it a teeny tiny bit bigger than needed so I could trim the sides and have an even canvas to work with. And next we're going to cut out 4-inch squares. At least I think so. I took notes during all of this, but our new kitten Sandy decided that I didn't need them anymore. But anyway, I put the Danishes on sheet pans lined with parchment paper to let them do their final proof. How long, you may ask? I would love to tell you, but I can't even blame this on Sandy because I simply did not write it down. I pushed these pastries until they looked dangerously wobbly. That's all I know. So I don't recommend putting these in a super warm spot to proof because that might melt all the butter out of the carefully laminated layers that we've worked so hard on. So please be careful with that. And while waiting for those to proof, I started tackling the last element of these Danishes, the cream on top. I wanted it to be very rich and luxurious because that's how eating mascarpone makes me feel. So I started by making a pâte de pomme. Took me an embarrassing amount of tries to pronounce that correctly. At least I hope I pronounced it correctly. I don't know. The French language sucks. And I mean that as disrespectfully as possible. I'm from Spain, so I'm allowed to say that, okay? For it, we're going to need 200 grams of egg yolk, or roughly 5 yolks. And 360 grams of sugar. We're going to heat that all up over a double boiler until the temperature reaches 150 degrees Fahrenheit or 65 degrees Celsius, so that salmonella cannot get us. As soon as the mixture is at the correct temperature, quickly start whipping it with the pedal attachment, not the whisk one, for a long time. Like seriously, this is going to take a while. As far as I understand, you can't really over mix this, but please don't quote me on that. Once the mixture is looking pale and fluffy and the bowl doesn't feel hot to the touch anymore, it's time to add in your room temperature mascarpone, as well as a little pinch of salt and a splash of vanilla. Then we're going to go in with our heavy cream. I think I did equal parts of heavy cream and mascarpone, but once again, I did not write it down because I constantly, severely overestimate my ability to remember things. I let that whip up until I felt like it was holding its shape pretty well, although in hindsight, I should have let it go a little bit longer. When there is heavy cream, mascarpone, and eggs involved, I get a little panicky because I've curdled and overwhipped so many things in my life that I tend to err on the side of caution. I put the cream into a piping bag fit with a round nozzle and put that into the fridge to set for a little bit. The Danishes were pretty close to being done proofing at this point, so I started cutting out the caramel discs, which was harder than I expected. Are you guys noticing a trend here? So many things went just like 15% wrong. So I was feeling a little iffy about everything at this point, which is just kind of like the nature of recipe development. Well, I don't know if I would go as far as to say I'm developing anything really, but I've been trying to work out more of my own creations rather than just grabbing recipes off of the internet, and it's been really difficult, but like in a fulfilling type of way. It's so easy to feel discouraged when things aren't 100% perfect, but at the same time, these are recipes that I thought about and then literally brought into existence, and that's something that I wasn't always able to do. And it makes me feel pretty confident about my own abilities, and I think that's invaluable. Okay, enough ranting. The Danishes were ready at this point. My oven was preheated at 350 degrees Fahrenheit, and so it was time to do the unthinkable. Shove the caramel discs into the fully proofed and extremely wobbly Danishes, completely disregarding the lamination we worked so hard to achieve. This is why Danishes are easier than croissants. No one is going to notice if you didn't get a perfect honeycomb structure because they're going to be very busy inhaling all of the delicious filling. I egg washed them and baked them for 25 minutes, and yep, the caramel bubbled over and melted all over the place. I am unsure if I picked the wrong type of filling or if freezing the discs would have actually prevented all of this from happening, but oh well. Somehow there was still quite a bit of chocolate left in the Danishes, so I cut them out of the pool of regrets that they baked in and piped the very much still not set cream on top. Then I dusted them with cocoa powder because I still had not realized that I forgot to add any sort of coffee element to this, and I wanted them to have that tiramisu look, so boom, we're done. Despite everything, they somehow look quite scrumptious, don't they? And well, good news, they tasted even better than they looked. But like actually, apparently this is one of my family's favorite things that I have ever made, and yes, I was surprised to hear that as well. But considering that I alone ate 4 of them, I think I understand why. I want to thank all of you for coming on this wild ride with me. I will definitely be making more Danish videos in the future, so if you have any flavor requests, drop them down in the comments. And as always, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like the video if you liked it, dislike it if you didn't, comment, subscribe, and all that jazz, and I will see you next time. Bye!